This week on The Other Side, censorship bureaucrats out of control.
I will not hesitate to use further graduated powers at my disposal if there was continued non-compliance.
Australia's libertarian minority is outraged. The control left is using the tragedies of last weekend to seize more censorship control, and the Liberal and National parties are happy to let them do it and share in the power. Meanwhile, many Aussies are sleepwalking to a future where a very small group of elites will have control over what we can and cannot read and watch. The government's proposed misinformation and disinformation censorship laws and their attack on free speech online rears its ugly head again. Freedom and ANZAC Day. That's the focus of this weekend show. G'day Melbourne, g'day Mount Gambier, g'day Australia. This is episode 310 of The Other Side for the weekend commencing Friday the 26th of April 2024. I'm Damien Curry. Well, they have really overstepped the mark this time. Now, there's a bit of a narrative going around at the moment that Elon Musk is the big bad billionaire that needs to be brought down a peg or two by the great Crusaders of safety and security down under in little old Australia. And it sounds like a very attractive narrative, doesn't it? All the politicians have bought into it. Everybody's getting behind the fight against big bad Elon. Well, I want to present a slightly different narrative for you tonight to have a think about. Have a look at it this way. A little band of power-mad, out-of-control e-Karen bureaucrats in a country called Australia think they have the authority to tell the whole world what they can and can't watch online. Now, I thought these people just wanted to dictate and dominate over us as Aussies. Nope. They're so high on self-importance delusion, these bureaucrats, that they think they're bigger than that. Well, it's time for us to remind them how tiny and insignificant they are. It's time, I think, that we really consider sacking the eSafety Commissioner and disbanding the eSafety Commission. Let me explain why. One of the ways in which big government takes power and control that we all have to be on the lookout for all the time, be careful, because it's sneaky, is under the guise of keeping us safe. All the great dystopian novelists have warned about it, from Huxley's Brave New World to Orwell's 1984, and even J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter. Now, we do need regulations and government authorities to keep us safe from some things: dodgy builders, criminals, and invading armies. But sometimes government goes too far. Actually, let me correct that. Government always goes too far because it likes to feed itself and its own importance, so it can justify taking more power and tax dollars from us and growing and growing and growing itself. So when governments say it's for your own good, we're keeping you safe, we have to immediately push back skeptically and cautiously with, okay, but who's keeping a check on how far you're going with that? But I didn't realise how bad it had gotten until this week, when the eSafety Commissioner decided to demand that all social media platforms take down video of the stabbing attack on Western Sydney Christian Orthodox Bishop Ma Murray Emanuel. That vision was not that disturbing. It's not that graphic. There are reports that the knife didn't even open. I've seen the footage. It looks like somebody punching somebody, and it's not pleasant, but it's not terrifying. It's not anything like what you'd see in an average Hollywood movie these days. But what makes this interesting is that, as we discussed on the show last week, this bishop is a huge social media identity all around the world. So such an order is a kind of global censorship, and the order is a global order.
I have issued a notice to X Corp requiring them to move this content. A legal notice will also be sent to Meta this afternoon, and further notices will likely follow. I will not hesitate to use further graduated powers at my disposal if there was continued non-compliance.
Wow, she could be the next Premier of Victoria with that attitude. How did X respond to that little rousing on from the Queen of Online Censorship from Australia? They responded like this. The recent attacks in Australia are a horrific assault on free society. Our condolences go out to all those who've been affected, and we stand with the Australian people in calling for those responsible to be brought to justice. Following these events, the Australian Safety Commissioner ordered X to remove certain posts in Australia that publicly commented on the recent attack against a Christian bishop. These posts did not violate X's rules on violent speech. X believes that eSafety order was not within the scope of Australian law, and we complied with the directive pending a legal challenge. X has now received a demand from the eSafety Commissioner that X globally withhold these posts or face a daily fine of 785,000 Australian dollars, about 500,000 US dollars. Okay, they're doing this in our name, folks. Australian petty bureaucrats are finding large global media platforms these insane levels of money because somebody somewhere might post something on their platforms that they don't approve of. This will have an impact on our country and its reputation internationally as a free and tolerant society that's truly committed to adult public dialogue and fundamental principles of liberal democracy. The way they handled COVID has had an impact on the way the world sees Australia already, and it's not positive, I can assure you. And this too will make us a less attractive destination for investment, business, which means jobs, partnerships, and everything. All right, maybe you don't care about that. But what is it doing to our freedom and liberty domestically at home then? Back to X's statement. This was a tragic event, and we do not allow people to praise it or call for further violence. There is a public conversation happening about the event on X and across Australia, as is often the case when events of major public concern occur. Yep, and in grown-up liberal democracies where governments treat people like adults to be served and respected, not like children to be lorded over like an angry, rousing, power-mad schoolteacher, we are supposed to allow healthy public conversations to take place. You get peace between different ethnic groups like Muslims and Christians in Western Sydney through more community connection and conversation, good and bad. That's how you build understanding. You build division by shutting down conversation or communication between groups that disagree. We do not need bureaucrats interfering in that normal, natural human process, or people using tragedy like this for their political ends, like censorship. Back to X's statement again. While X respects the right of a country to enforce its laws within its jurisdiction, the eSafety Commissioner does not have the authority to dictate what content X's users can see globally. We will robustly challenge this unlawful and dangerous approach in court. Global takedown orders go against the very principles of a free and open internet and threaten free speech everywhere. Now, folks, you know, it's very rare that corporations have the guts to take a stand on principle like that. We see corporations all over the place grandstanding and virtue signaling on all sorts of garbage these days. But they only do that because it serves their interests and they think that their marketing efforts will be improved and there'll be dollars in it for them. What we're seeing here is a company sincerely taking a stand on principle that could cost it a fair bit. And we should therefore fully support it and fully support Elon Musk. And thankfully, many smart, right-minded Australians do. One responder to the X statement wrote this: "As an Australian, I fully support Elon Musk on this matter, more than I support the government. A foundational principle of Western societies is that the government doesn't tell you what to read, think or say. Unfortunately, the Australian government believes it can bully citizens into following their decrees. I fear freedom of speech and freedom of thought are on very shaky ground in Australia right now. We need and thank you for your support." And this one: freedom of speech is an essential human right, promoting civil liberties and democracy. Thank you, X, for upholding these principles. Government global takedown orders contravene protection of these rights, restricting debate and knowledge to a controlled narrative, affecting freedom of speech everywhere. And finally, this is why I happily pay to use X. Thank you, Elon Musk, for standing up for us. Good stuff there, and it gives me a lot of heart to read that, especially when you see the onslaught from both sides of politics supporting this attack on X and Elon Musk. Now, in the Westminster system, the job of pushing back normally falls to the opposition party. But in Australia, we seem to have no opposition party on issues that are centre or centre-left anymore because our main centre-right party has shifted so far to the centre-left. Also, even though our opposition leader Peter Dutton comes from the more conservative right-leaning faction of his party, he used to be a cop. So he's more authoritarian right than libertarian right. And he's very big on government surveillance power. He helped bring in laws a couple of years back that allow government authorities much more access to your private data than they had before. But I think this time he's backed the wrong horse. Nevertheless, he has backed it, giving the ABC and left-wing mainstream media, which of course wants the power to control what you hear and see all for itself, all the ammunition that they need to paint Elon Musk as the arrogant global CEO, thinking he's above the law of the mighty Australian government.
We've seen some of the comments from Elon Musk overnight. They see themselves above the law.
Political frustration with social media giants is building and could provide a new opportunity to push forward stalled misinformation laws aimed at requiring companies to keep tabs on false information spread on their networks.
We need to get the right balance. So that is, we don't want to impinge on your ability to express a view in a democracy. It's a key fundamental element of who we are.
Some things are clearly designed to spread false information and to incite violence.
Okay, so that was how ABC News reported it this week. First, we heard Peter Dutton's view there, calling for a balance between free speech and public safety. And then we heard the much more authoritarian vibe of Labor's Chris Bowen saying some things are deliberately put up online to incite violence. Yes, that's true, but not in this case. And in a liberal democracy, we do not go around banning everything that might hurt us, and we must be sceptical of the motives of government that want to do that. And I don't trust Chris Bowen being the arbiter of what I can and cannot read or watch. Do you? As for Dutton, this is not the time for balance, mate. We are under attack because all of this is about bringing back onto the agenda something that was taken off the agenda after a massive backlash last year. Remember the Voice vote? Remember how Canberra got its backside handed to it on a plate? How the bureaucrats in the capital city voted for the Voice, 2-1, and everyone else in Australia voted against the Voice, 2-1. Yeah, well, they haven't forgotten that. They haven't forgotten the power that we had over them, that shows like this had, to be able to tell you the other side of the story so you can make up your own mind. The government doesn't like that, and the bureaucrats hate it. And the opposition doesn't like that either. The two major parties do not want anyone but them controlling things around this place. Okay, so they're now using the attack last week to put their Misinformation and Disinformation bill, those nasty laws, firmly back on the agenda, as the ABC explained in its report.
The first draft of the bill, which would give communications regulator ACMA stronger powers, was pulled by the government late last year. Some coalition figures had labelled the bill Orwellian, but the opposition now seems more open to reworked laws.
If the laws are inadequate and they need to be strengthened or added to, then we would support any effort from the government.
In a building famous for its division, social media giants are a rare common enemy. Both Labor and the Coalition seem to agree that if something can't be said offline, it shouldn't be spread online. But regulating the online world is tricky, and working out what is and isn't misinformation can be contentious. Even with a little bit of goodwill, landing these laws won't be easy.
That's the ABC's political reporter Tom Lowry there. It won't be easy at all, Tom. I think it'll spark the biggest backlash since The Voice from those of us sick of government and the elites. And the Liberal National Coalition needs to get its act together quick smart on formulating its policy and messaging on this that is a lot tougher than what we've seen so far. The people will back you. Meanwhile, once again, the minor parties, the Libertarian Party and One Nation, are speaking out strongly and owning this one. And it'd be nice for once to see some people from the old left, the left that used to stand up to the establishment and the elites before they became the establishment and the elites, some old left politicians and commentators saying, no, this is ethically and morally wrong in a liberal democracy and we won't have it. What's happened to all those old battlers? So, what is this eSafety Commission and where did it come from? And who is this American accented, rather bolshy woman who's the commissioner? Well, it was all set up in 2015 by the coalition government. The government originally appointed former federal police agent and eBay's head of trust and safety, Alistair McGibbon, as its first Children's eSafety Commissioner. Note the name change. It was set up as the Children's eSafety Commission, an election promise of the coalition in 2013 to protect kids online. Then it was changed, under Labor, to just eSafety. I guess because Labor and the left consider us all children to be controlled and managed. The Office of the eSafety Commissioner sits within the Australian Communications and Media Authority, ACMA. That's the authority that this show and ADH TV are kind of accountable to. So we already have to be very careful what we say and do, and we already are probably not doing ourselves any favours even talking about this issue or criticising our government overlords. but we must while we still can. Originally, the eSafety Commission was given the power to fine social media companies up to $17,000 a day. That's a heck of a lot less than the $750,000 a day they want to fine X now. See how government works, folks? Bit by bit, when you're not looking, they change the rules. And before you know it, your freedom is toast. So it's gone from remove the child abuse online or we'll fine you $17,000 a day, which is totally reasonable and I would support that 100%, to remove whatever we think is dangerous for people to think or we'll fine you $750,000 a day. Not so reasonable. When they launched the thing, the government said it wanted to have a close cooperative working relationship with social media companies. These are large organisations, they said back in 2015, and we certainly had a dialogue with them about not interfering too much with their processes. Now the new improved, not just for kids, but also for adult children and Karens Labor Party version of the eSafety Commission is firing on all cylinders. On its own website, it describes itself as the world's first government agency dedicated to keeping people safer online. We are now at the forefront of the fight against online risks and harms faced by adults as well as children, it proudly declares. We are a fast-growing team of educators, investigators, lawyers, policy analysts, technology experts, digital specialists and other professionals who share one goal, sticking our noses in other people's business like a pack of angry Karens. No, it doesn't actually say that. I just made that last bit up. I couldn't help myself. It says, we share one goal, a safer and more positive online experience for all Australians. And they, my friends, will decide what safer and more positive looks like, not you. Australia's eSafety Commissioner is Julie Inman-Grant. Ms. Inman-Grant has extensive experience in the technology industry, the website says, having held senior public policy and safety roles with Microsoft, Twitter and Adobe. The Commissioner's career began in Washington, D.C., working in the US Congress and the not-for-profit sector before taking on her role at Microsoft, which spanned 17 years. She served as one of the company's first and longest-standing government relations professionals, ultimately in the role of Global Director for Safety and Privacy Policy and Outreach. At Twitter, she set up and drove the company's policy, safety and philanthropy programs across Australia, New Zealand and Southeast Asia. So she's old Twitter. And Elon Musk is new Twitter. So she'd be completely unbiased then. In 2021, Julie oversaw significant increases in the eSafety Office's budget. Yes, increased staffing levels and launched the Global Safety by Design initiative. Commissioner Inman-Grant was reappointed for a further 5-year term by the Australian Government in January 2022. So she's with us until 2027. She was recently named one of Australia's most influential women by the Australian Financial Review and a leading Australian in foreign affairs by the Sydney Morning Herald. In 2020, the World Economic Forum, the WEF, appointed the Commissioner as one of the Agile 50, the world's most influential leaders revolutionising government. Okay, now, since nobody in the government or the opposition wants to do anything to monitor this eSafety censorship group, it falls to the hard-working One Nation Senator Malcolm Roberts and other right-minded minor party and independent politicians to hold them to account. The last time Senator Roberts had the chance to question Ms. Julie Inman-Grant was in February, not so long ago, in a Senate committee hearing. She was just back from the World Economic Forum meeting in January in Davos, Switzerland, where she said she had a lovely, productive time.
I achieved more in 4 days than I could in 4 years because I was meeting with senior technology executives. I was talking directly to the people who were building AI and immersive technologies and asking directly to the decision makers what they were doing to make their platform safer.
Okay, good. No problem with that. She can go to big meetings and meet big people overseas. That's all legitimately part of the gig. Senator Roberts then asked the Commissioner about a letter that she sent to Twitter after she got back in February regarding 62,000 banned Australian Twitter accounts.
It was reported that 62,000 previously banned users, and to be permanently banned on Twitter, you have violated the policies pretty egregiously a number of times. So we asked them the question, and they responded. When we asked about the 62,000, they responded with 6,100. We assumed that meant they reinstated 6,100 previously banned Australian accounts. Which wasn't in the manner and form of the notice and the question in which we asked them. But they didn't name what those specific ones were, but they did tell us that there are no additional safety provisions, even though they have been permanently banned for online hate in some cases.
It seems to me, Ms. Grant, that you're assuming the previous bans were in order. Have you explored those previous bans before coming to that judgment?
Well, so Twitter, as the company, had a whole range of policies, including a hateful conduct policy. They remove or they.
So you haven't. What you've done is you've gone off their interpretation of their policy, even though we know they were biased.
Let's be clear. She used to work at Twitter. Is it possible that she could be completely unbiased and neutral towards its new owner, Elon Musk? I'm not suggesting anything, of course, but it's fair and reasonable to ask that question of a government official in this role. Anyway, back to Senator Malcolm Roberts of One Nation in the Senate in February.
What you've done is you've gone off their interpretation of their policy, even though we know they were biased.
Well, that's the only thing we can't do, Senator.
Could you come back to my question, please, and give me examples of Australian accounts?
Senator Roberts, I appreciate that you're somewhat agitated, but if you could please respect the witnesses.
Whoa, hold it there for a second. Is the chair accusing the good senator of being agitated there? He doesn't look too agitated to me. And actually, he has every right to be agitated. He's representing his constituency, but he looks very cool, calm, collected and professional. This could be a little gaslighting from the chair, maybe. A little woman-splaining, perhaps.
Appreciate that you're somewhat agitated, but if you could please respect the witnesses and allow them to answer.
Well, I'd like the
questions.
witness to give me examples of Australian accounts that X had allowed back that your office objects to. That's my question, and you haven't answered it.
I didn't ask them specific questions about which accounts that there were. I asked for the quantum of the numbers.
Are you setting yourself up as an arbiter of what should and should not be seen online?
No, I am not. I've been designated by the government to serve as the eSafety Commissioner and remediate harms of online individuals that have experienced online abuse and in most cases have reported that abuse to the platform. The platform hasn't enforced their terms of policy, so we are there as a safety net or a backstop to help remediate that harm.
Okay, so she goes straight back to the keeping kids safe agenda that her office has, which nobody would want to argue with. However, her powers now extend far beyond that.
Your remarks included this comment, quote, "There are lots of different tools in the toolbox we'll be using," end of quote. What are those tools? Under what explicit power do you possess them? And who supervises how you use them?
Well, all our powers are designated under the Online Safety Act. We have a range of complaints schemes that deal with youth-based cyberbullying, image-based abuse, adult cyber abuse.
Who supervises how you use them? Who assesses whether or not you're being effective or overextending?
Well, we are held to account. We have lots of reporting and transparency and accountability measures ourselves. And if there's ever a question about any decision that's made, they can be challenged through internal review, through the Ombudsman, through the AAT, or through the federal court. So we are accountable to the people and to the government.
Okay, now it's this next bit that troubled me a bit. There's no doubt that our eSafety Commissioner sees herself and her office as having a global role to play and global influence to exert.
Thank you. At the World Economic Forum planning session in Davos, you said, quote, "We have started something called the Global Online Safety Regulator." Who is we? Did you receive ministerial permission to involve Australia in another globalist power sinkhole? You may laugh, but that's facing a big threat.
I'm an independent statutory authority. The Internet is global. Most of our regulatory targets are based overseas. And for more than 7 years, we were the only online safety regulator in the world. Now, we use the tools that we have and we can be effective, but we know we're going to go much further when we work together with other like-minded independent statutory authorities around the globe.
Now, all of this is fine if, and it's a huge if the powers of these e-safety regulators are carefully monitored and curtailed. But I don't get the feeling that there's a lot of humility going on here or a willingness to be sure to protect the freedom of speech. Do you? I don't hear words from the Commissioner like balance and care to protect free speech or anything like that. I just see someone with a power who's on a personal mission or a professional mission, if you like. And Elon Musk is starting to look more like Harry Potter every day.
Come in. Good evening, Mr. Potter. Sit. You're going to be doing some lines for me today, Mr. Potter. No, not with your quill. Going to be using a rather special one of mine. I want you to write, I must not tell lies.
How many times?
Well, let's say for as long as it takes for the message to sink in. Yes?
Nothing.
That's right. Because you know, deep down, you deserve to be punished. Don't you, Mr. Potter?
A new news poll came out this week. That's the poll that the Australian newspaper commissions every so often into how the pollies are faring. Aussies still remain very much split between left and right. The two-party preferred vote, this is the poll that tries to copy what would happen in a real election when all the preferences of minor parties and independents get distributed out to the final two big parties. It still puts the combined left-wing vote, the red line, a touch ahead of the combined centre and right-wing vote, the blue line, 51 to 49% to Labor after preferences. So in statistical terms, that's kind of neck and neck. So Aussies remain split right down the political middle. When you have a look at the parties' individual breakdowns, let's look at it from left to right, politically speaking. The far-left Greens are down only a tiny bit to a huge 12% of the primary vote. The left-wing Labor Party are up a touch at 33%. The centre-right to centre-left Liberal National Party coalition is up a touch to 38%. That's also up a bit. And other parties across the political spectrum, like the right-leaning Libertarians and left-leaning Animal Welfare and Independents, hold about 10% of the primary vote. And the leading Conservative Party, One Nation, is steady on 7%. In terms of preferred leader, Mr Albanese's net approval rating of -6 was a 1-point improvement, and Mr Dutton's net approval rating of -15 was unchanged. Albanese still leads as preferred PM by 13 points. The Australian newspaper says that its latest news poll also tested voter reaction to Labor's clean energy and industry agenda. This is the big state economic intervention policy they're calling A Future Made in Australia. This left-wing policy is basically firmly grounded in the idea that if the government says so, it can make people make stuff in Australia. Controlling economies, like that's always worked so well in the past. I can't imagine why it would fail now. Under this new policy, tax breaks, loans and subsidies for manufacturers will be provided, paid for by taxpayers. The Australian newspaper's pollsters asked voters, quote, whether the government should actively invest in projects that help Australia transition to a clean energy economy and create new local industries and jobs in Australia, unquote. And a second question, just to balance it out, asked, quote, whether the Australian government should stay out of the way and just provide a better environment for business by reducing energy costs, cutting red tape and reforming the industrial relations sector, unquote. The pollsters obviously have a lot of faith in people's appreciation of how the economy actually works. But anyway, for what it's worth, the majority of voters polled supported more government intervention in the economy, the left-wing philosophical view, while 38% believe that the government involvement should be contained to just creating an environment for business to thrive, the right-wing philosophical view. So no surprise there. The problem, though, is that it's not just a question of right or left. It's a question of right and wrong. The 20th century proved to the world that big state, big government interventions, and in fact big government itself, is actually a disaster for any economy, any society and any people. It makes a country poorer and it screws up all the social services for everyone as a result. Socialism destroys wealth, efficiency and value creation. And most of all, it destroys freedom of choice and incentive to do, well, anything really. So we end up with no healthcare, no disability services, no low-cost energy, no housing. It's all been tested already, folks, all worked out last century. But the kids today seem to be hell-bent on thinking that they're the first generation ever to consider that socialism can work. Let's hear in around 1 minute what socialism actually is, why it can't work, and this clip comes from the very clever people at Y Minutes, an online education channel. This is US politician and Army veteran Nick Freitas.
Socialism is a system or condition of society in which the means of production are owned and controlled by the state or the people. So what the hell does that mean? Well, under socialism, you can still own your toothbrush or a pair of shoes or some other sort of good, but you are not permitted to have private ownership of the very capital which is needed to produce those goods and services. No, those things must be owned by either the state or some kind of collective. And while we have ample examples of such a theory failing miserably when put into practice, there are still a lot of people that insist it's a really good theory. And maybe that's because there is some comfort in believing that if only the right people were in charge and that all of us could agree on a particular course of action, then we could focus our collective efforts on making all of our lives better. The problem is, we don't agree. And ultimately, any theory which subordinates your individual ideas, creativity, or goals to a collective in the name of the common good is going to run into a couple of serious problems. And that first problem is, who gets to decide the common good? Because you as an individual certainly don't. The collective decides, which is to say some sort of simple majority. And if you and your ideas are outvoted or outmaneuvered politically when the time comes to draft the next 5-year plan, well, tough for you. The second problem with the system is that it degrades our humanity and treats people as if we're nothing more than producers or consumers. Under a socialist system, you're no longer an individual. You're simply a cog in the machine that needs to be managed toward a specific goal which will be determined by someone other than you. And this is why Alexis de Tocqueville warned that socialism calls in fact for the forfeiture of human liberty, to the point where I would say that it was simply a new system of serfdom.
The Australian News poll also shows, unsurprisingly, that, quote, younger voters were more likely to support bigger government, with 64% of 18 to 34-year-olds agreeing with state intervention, compared with 31% citing the alternative. The only demographic where a larger number picked the better environment for business proposition was, you guessed it, those aged over 65, 49% compared with 48% in favour of intervention, unquote. So pack your bags and get the hell out would be the message I'd take from that. Not that that's anything new. Small business people have been giving up now for years. Most people I know over 50 who could be setting up a small business and putting their decades of work experience and knowledge to good use are packing their bags and heading for a nice retirement at the beach or buggering off overseas to some place that won't tax them to death. This is instead of doing what generations in the past in Australia did, setting up small businesses that might hire 10 to 20 kids at a pop. But don't worry, government just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and you can choose your own pronouns when you work for the government, so that's cool. It's just that they will eventually run out of other people's money to spend to keep you employed. So, there's that. But hey, that's just the theory of a bunch of crusty old white men. What the heck would they know? They only created liberal democracy and capitalism over thousands of years, and they're to be scoffed at and disregarded completely. The Greens know best, kids. Here's my absolute favourite bit of this week's latest news poll in The Australian. 74% of Labor voters are backing Albo's A Future Made in Australia Big State Economic Interventionist policy. That's not surprising. Labor voters voting daftly for socialist interventions and ignoring all the history lessons about how they do not work because it feels nice. But my favourite bit of all this is that 40% of coalition voters also support big state intervention. The most fundamental anti-liberal policy you can get. 40% of people who vote for the Liberal and National parties support big state communist-style economic intervention. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why I believe Australia is probably stuffed. We're doomed to an Argentinian 20th century future because we have no major centre-right or right-wing political party or majority of people. The culture war is over and the left have won. The Liberal and National parties are now officially parties in which at least half of the members are centre-left or left-wing by traditional political definitions. So our choice at elections is centre-left or left. Our choice in media will always be centre-left or left now because nobody except a shoestring budget show like this will ever present the right-wing economic view of personal responsibility because they can't afford to. And the ABC is never going to. So I reckon unless the small audience we have on this show really starts to get smart and organised somehow, Australia's future will be Union, Labor and Green. The tax man is coming and the value of our currency is going to plummet as fast as the debt will continue to rise. And nobody will care. The left is still trying to sell us the lie that inflation is caused by a couple of supermarkets that are price gouging, and they make only 2.5% profit a year. Yeah, pull the other one, fellas. It plays jingle bells. The Australian also noted that all this genius Aussie voter approval of the government's big interventionist agenda, quote, clashes with the view of some economists and the Productivity Commission, which has warned against taxpayers wasting dollars on favourite industries that might otherwise be unviable, unquote. No kidding. Who knew that governments are really good at wasting truckloads of money on industries that don't produce enough value to be economically viable? When's that ever happened before in history? Soviet Russia, Mao's China, every other big state communist country on earth, Malcolm Turnbull's NBN. Oh yeah, leave it to government, folks. We'll fix it. Accountable to the market, forced daily to be efficient, 100% success oriented, no perversion of goals or incentives in the bureaucracy, folks. Yep, none of that. But the Prime Minister says Australia risks being left behind in the global race to transition to cleaner economies and sovereign manufacturing unless we have more government involvement in driving investment. Right. It's ANZAC Day week and the Veterans Families Support Organisation and Veterans Support Organisation Legacy knows better than anyone the impact that war has on the lives of those who serve and their families. Legacy Australia started with a promise on the battlefield in World War I when an Australian soldier pledged to look after the wife and family of his dying mate. The Legacy promise hasn't changed in over 100 years, but the approach has.
For over 100 years, Legacy has been entering the homes of the families of our fallen and injured veterans to listen, understand and respond with compassion and practical support.
I believe it was around 2015 that I first came into contact with Legacy. So at that time my husband was struggling. I had 3 children. There was financial difficulty. There was a lot of stress, obviously, a lot of anxiety. So Legacy provided really practical support. They came and spoke to me at a time that was convenient for me. Without Legacy's support at that time, I think that I would have been overwhelmed.
Legacy operates all around Australia. One of its biggest projects underway right now is the building of Legacy House on the site of Brisbane's Greenslopes Hospital. The idea being to be able to welcome veterans into a place that feels like home, somewhere they can get comprehensive support and care that they need with warmth, understanding and efficiency. And joining us now on the other side to talk about it is Brendan Cox, the CEO of Legacy in Brisbane. Brendan, thanks very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule in ANZAC week to come and have a chat with us. We really appreciate it.
Greatly appreciate the time you're giving me, Damien.
So, Brendan, Legacy's history is about supporting families of fallen veterans. Yes. You're broadening that a little bit lately, moving into supporting veterans in need and their families still that have come home from the battlefield.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about.
Yeah, certainly. So, Damien, for 100 years, Legacy has walked into the living rooms of our fallen. We have administered our services to ensure no social or financial disadvantage to those families, and every family has its own unique circumstances. The power of Legacy is a relationship between that family and our volunteers we call legatees. So that model of care will continue for the next 100 years plus. There is an element of our charter in which we must also support the families of the incapacitated veteran. Of course, incapacitation can be both physical and mental. And until 1980, PTSD was not diagnosable. So prior to 1980, things such as mental health were termed of battle fatigue or
Shell shock.
Shell shock, and they were somewhat of a derogatory term to the military member, as if I was not as strong as the others, as my mates. So we have learnt a lot as a community about mental health and the need to support those who are going through a trauma, but also do the therapies to support them. So the Legacy House at Greenslopes is a response to acknowledging what the Royal Commission is telling us into defence and veteran suicide, is that the clinical and non-clinical worlds must come together to build a resilience program that ideally keeps veterans out of the clinical care system, that warmly navigates them into a community where we support that journey, and also listen to the family, not forgetting that there's a lot of talk about veteran. There's not enough talk about the partner and children.
Yeah.
I think Nick Caldos, the Commissioner for the Royal Commission, has done a brilliant job in identifying the impact on families. And he said it is obvious, the evidence is there, that the service to our country by the veteran has a direct impact on their families. We always knew that. So Greenslopes and New Legacy House at Greenslopes is acknowledging those clear statements being given to us by the Royal Commission.
So this house is going to be clear. This is a national importance, because this is going to be the first of its type in the country.
Yes.
And it's setting a model that you want to see rolled out. You undertook a Churchill Fellowship last year. I understand you want to tell us a little bit about that and how this work has extended from that.
Yeah, absolutely, Damien. I've been on the journey for about 6 to 7 years. We did a deep dive into what we call our Family Assist program, which is this incapacitated veteran support to that family. And what we learned is that unless we are working very closely with RSL, mates to mates, open arms, we were always dealing with symptom, not cause, if I could be as brash as that. And unless we dealt with the family unit inclusive of the veteran, as opposed to veteran, some people doing stuff, and family, others doing stuff, we were never going to solve their problems. We're never going to meet their needs.
And this is what the Royal Commission said.
Absolutely. And so this is what the Churchill Fellowship was all about. Right. So I did a Paul Teese Churchill Fellowship to investigate better models of care to those families supporting a veteran with mental health and also physical injury. Visited the US, UK, amazing organisations doing amazing work. Now the interesting part in the UK is they have developed a whole new system of care for veterans that is based on, as they transition out and are identified as needing support, there is a multidisciplinary team within the NHS, their National Health System, in which they are now warmly integrated into their community. So here is your GP, here is your physio, here is your specialists of wrapping around the whole family. So
that takes a lot of pressure off, because just that alone, and people don't, the pressure of finding these resources, getting this help when you need it, and it leads to people saying, well, and it's a big step for a lot of veterans, I suppose, to just take that first step. You don't want to be hindering them in any way.
That's
you don't
right.
want to go, oh, this is all too hard, I'm going to give up, after they've made the commitment and sort of gotten through to kind of seeking help. Right?
And remembering, Damien, most veterans transition to community very smoothly, very easily, valued contributors to all aspects of our community. We are talking about the top 5 to 6% that are struggling due to the service to our country. We have a national obligation to not only support veterans in that place. When a defence member joins, a family serves. When the defence member's health is impacted, we have an obligation to support that family. Because if that family supports the veteran, we have to just maintain that family unit, and we are now contributing back into society with a good, resilient veteran who has issues, yes. They're issues that are natural from being exposed to traumatic events in the service to our country.
And this may not be the weakest 5%.
They are
It might be the strongest 5%,
Absolutely.
the toughest 5% that's served harder.
We have to defeat that.
It's not a...
Absolutely, Damon. Sorry. We have to defeat that stigma.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we all have physical health, we all have mental health. Based on the challenges we meet in both realms, we will respond to that either positive or negative. Every person with a mental health issue can seek therapies and support. The more they are connected, the stronger they will be. The more connected that family is, the more healthier they are to give support to the veteran, because they're the ones living with them 24/7. If we don't support them and teach them to put their mask on first before helping the veteran, worse things can happen. Bad things can happen. We all know about that. We see it playing out constantly on the TV.
Yeah, look, sadly we do hear, so many terrible stories these days, and veteran suicide is a real issue.
Yes.
Are we getting any closer to understanding it more deeply, to understanding, and is the treatments for PTSD and things like that? Are they getting better, the protocols and medicines?
Yeah, Damien, it's a really good question. I think, and I probably going out on a limb here, I think we've done enough research. I think we have enough evidence. The challenge to us now is to come together, forget about our organisational constraints and what criteria you can come in or we don't meet you with. We are too institutional in our approach. We actually are talking about ourselves when people seek help. This is what I can do for you, but you're saying this. So you're outside the parameters. Good luck, go find someone else.
Yeah, right.
So what we need to is DVA, Department of Defence, the ex-service sector, the for-purpose sector and the clinical world, the health system, need to come together and say, how do we listen to their story and respond to their story as opposed to focus on what we do and don't do for them.
Yeah, it's funny how organisations, whether they're corporate, government, institutional or service organisations, volunteer organisations, will have a very inward perspective after a while, start talking more about how they're operating than what they're actually there to achieve.
The greatest value we can all have is empathy.
Yeah.
And empathy demands that we must listen to the other person's story. And by listening to their story, we can respond in a very conscious manner. So the idea out of Green Slopes is that through this multidisciplinary team approach, we're all listening to that story and seeing what we all can do. So rather than this family navigating around southeast Queensland looking for the support they need, they're the ones in trauma. They're the ones we need to stabilise. They come through one door, one story, heard by all those social prescribing agencies who are now connected into the Keith Payne Mental Health Unit. They are now connected into Green Slopes Hospital. And now the therapies and programs that we are putting together will be evaluated by Gallipoli Medical Research Foundation located there as well.
Oh, right, okay.
When we now have this system of care, because at the moment our challenge is we have very good eco-silos. Department of Veterans Affairs is an effective organisation. Department of Defence is an effective organisation, but they don't correlate their information flow very well.
Right.
So let's create the system above all of these silos and make it a system of excellence as opposed to silos of excellence that can actually work against each other. And that's really frustrating for a family in trauma.
Yeah. So what you're doing is you're really putting that overlay that brings the focus back to the client.
Exactly.
It brings the focus back to serving the person that's supposed to be served at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And how can we make sure that all of these agencies and all of these organisations are able to serve that client and giving the client one place to go to, right, to get that. I think the physical, we underestimate in this sort of digital world that we live in, the importance of the physical space.
Yeah.
So the house is designed to put all that in one place, right, and also create an environment that feels right, I suppose. Is that?
That is absolutely it, Damien.
Okay.
Geography is one element of this, being at Green Slopes where all those physical, mental, research capabilities already reside in support of veterans and their families.
Now, Green Slopes in Brisbane, for people who don't know, that
Yes.
hospital was a veterans hospital, has always been a
correct.
hospital that's very focused on return servicemen and women. But this is going to take that a step further, obviously, and is the model for doing this elsewhere. I mean, you're hoping this is going to take off and be applied in Sydney and Melbourne and Adelaide and Perth and Hobart.
Absolutely. So the idea is to operate this system through the primary health networks. So the primary health networks work throughout Australia. Now that we capture veteran data where families are living through the ABS data, we know from a Queensland perspective that Brisbane North and Brisbane South PHNs, so pretty much southeast Queensland, and also North Queensland, because of Townsville, has a higher concentration of veterans and their families than the other PHNs within the state.
Oh, okay.
So now we can apply this model, the resources which are finite, to the areas in which there are high demand. Now, of course, there will be regional and remote veterans and their families who are also in need of support. But what we can do there is either use the telehealth or Zoom or IT sort of infrastructure to at least reach out, or do fly in, fly out. And this is one of the great learnings out of the US, an amazing organisation called Homebase, based in Boston. They are set up deliberately to support their veterans and their families, primarily those, of course, in mental health, poor mental health. Also families that have had a veteran who has suicided, and therefore the ripple effect and their likelihood of suicide ideation is increased. So they bring them together. They fly them in, no expense to them, so there's no barriers to seeking support. They fly them in, house them, a 2-week very intensive course, but they are changing the whole mindset of every cohort that goes through. Yeah. We need a similar approach. We need a similar approach in which they come to one location to get the support in their local area, but a complementary approach of then reaching out to those who can't get in for whatever reason that may be. There's no simple solution here.
No. It's fascinating what we're learning though in neuroscience now too, in relation to the training of the brain's fight and flight response or these triggers. I mean, if people think of mental illness as being psychological or of the mind rather than the brain, it's a combination of both, right? And the brain, if it's not working properly, all the mind interventions, the psychological interventions won't work. Sometimes you need the medication to get the brain working, then the psychological interventions will work. So it's like, you know, but it's for a guy who's, you know, prided himself on serving his country, being strong, having that strong masculine, you know, drive to protect and be a serviceman. It can be tough to face the fact that, oh, hang on, my cognition's not quite right. It's not a reflection on my personality or my psychology. No. I've got to fix that, get that fixed first. That's just a reaction to the triggers and training and stimulation that my brain's copped during these war events, right?
Yeah.
And so it takes a little understanding of that. Then you've got to heal it, right? And then you've got to work on the psychological. So it's a pathway.
It is a total pathway, and it's a constantly moving pathway.
Yeah.
We don't know what the triggering events are sometimes. It could be an ANZAC day in which
right.
you do reflect, and all of a sudden, you know, you start self-administering alcohol or other drugs, you know, to soothe what you think is the right way. Now, the people who are going to identify that first up are going to be your family members. So we can teach them the psychoeducational tools on increasing the help-seeking behaviour of that veteran. Intuitively, you know, you'll reduce the suicide rates coming out of the veteran community. Not forgetting, veterans are trained. So I did 26 years in the military. I loved every day of my service. I wish I could be still serving now, but I was actually physically broken at the end. Good infantry career, jumped out of planes.
You're not too physically broken, I got to say. You're pretty fit for
absolutely.
Fella our age.
But exactly, no, and I run 10Ks a day, Monday to Friday. Right. So I am absolutely physically fit. But when I left and transitioned, I had to have spinal surgery, shoulder surgeries, but I'll do it all over again. The issue here is that veterans are trained, so I was infantry, we were trained to run at someone shooting at us. We were trained that you serve by your mates. It is a highly demanding career, a lot of physical and mental application. And I've got to say, I always felt very comfortable overseas serving side by side with Australians because I could really, you know,
rely on each other.
Rely on it. The tribalism is strong.
Yeah.
So when those exit away from the tribe army says, sorry mate, you're broken, you've got to leave now, and we're giving you about 8 weeks to transition out. The psychological effect is not even just the battlefield trauma, it's like my identity has just been taken from me, from the group that built it. So sometimes we have to untrain that aggression that we used on the battlefield to survive. And so when that person cuts us off at the road, we don't need to jump out of the car and try and beat them. We need to say you're in a safe environment in your community now. So there is an element of this transition that if we can support it better, that we can prepare that veteran's transition out of, you know, at a point where they're struggling with why is this happening to me, to wrap around services to the family to say it's okay though, we can land you softly into your new community with all the support you need. But we also need you to start connecting into, if you played Aussie Rules, we'll join your Aussie Rules club.
Yeah, you've got to find those other organisations and that other community engagement.
Redefine your new tribe, you know,
right.
So...
Redefine your new tribe.
You know, so they can only do that with the support of the community though.
Yeah.
You know, what we don't...
Well, now, I want to ask you about that. What do you reckon is the state of the community support at the moment? I mean, it's not Vietnam where we've got people booing and you know, hissing at soldiers, but we live in a society that's fairly anti-masculine. It lives under the protection of the military, but we forget that.
Yeah.
We forget that there's people at the front line protecting our country. We live inside it and then, you know, think that this is normal, this security that we have. We take it for granted. We don't respect masculinity or men or any of those values anymore. Forgive me for editorialising. I might be editorialising a bit, but do you feel that that's sort of, there is a cultural shift that's having a bit of an impact, or generally are people pretty good?
Look, I think they're pretty good towards our veterans and family members. I'll reflect on our first deployment in World War I. Nation of around 4.9 million, if give or take. We had 2 goes of saying, should we do conscription? Both times were defeated. Then we deploy the first AIF. Out of an eligible 1 million cohort of volunteering age of our male population, 417,000 volunteered.
Wow.
Now that's amazing for a young country.
Yep.
Now that included Indigenous, non-Indigenous, immigrants. In the first AIF, they found equality because together they fought and survived and died on the battlefield. Sometimes peace allows us to create labels in our community that actually don't survive the first shot and battle.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's no atheists in a foxhole. There's no labels in a foxhole.
Yeah.
It's you and your mate. So the military, I think, still has an area of reverence, an area of revere within the community. There's some aspects of the community that don't like Defence Force, and that may be because of their past or whatever. But I was
tends to sit above the fray when it comes to all that nonsense we carry on with most of the time.
Yeah, and look, as a veteran, I don't even listen to it. Yeah. I look at my mates when they march. I was at Maruka State School on the day before ANZAC. I was talking to primary kids. I looked at the way, with great reverence, they conducted their service, and that was with teachers, that was with parents. I do actually believe the community is getting stronger around ANZAC. I'm concerned about what happens with Australia Day and how we're treating that, but I think ANZAC, the day itself, and the way that we see our military and how they contribute to our community on such a regular basis. And these people put on a uniform. By putting on that uniform, you are saying, I am prepared to give up my life for this country. That's a pretty heavy uniform to wear for a long period of time and even a short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think ANZAC Day, I love it. It brings on tears, it brings on emotions, but it brings on an absolute source of pride about the service given to the country.
Brendan, thanks so much for coming out, your time today. Really do appreciate it. And we'll put I think we've had it on the screen, but it's bringithome.org.
Yeah, look, the campaign itself, it's a $9 million project. We've raised 8.3. We have 700,000 to go.
Well, let's get there.
Absolutely. So if there's any people out there that understand corporations, foundations, trusts, help us bring it home.
Thanks very much for joining us, and hopefully that will roll out all over the country eventually.
Wonderful,
and
wonderful.
Your work will be complete. So.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks for your time, Brendan. Take care. And that is all we have time for on the show this week. We hope you enjoyed the program. We hope you will join us again next week on The Other Side, right here on ADH TV. We'll catch you next week. Have a good one.